Dear Winnie, I almost feel blushing and a little bit embarrassed to hear of all the accolades you directed to me, but very much anyhow. Distinguished delegates, one of our first panelists today will give a presentation. It's Dr. Kathleen Cravero, who, like me, have spent her almost entire professional life serving the United Nations in many different capacities around the world. She's worked with UNAIDS, she's worked with UNICEF, with the United Nations Development Programme and the World Health Organization. And her last two assignments was UN, she was the director for the Bureau of Crisis Prevention and Recovery for UNDP, and she was also the deputy executive director of UNAIDS, the joint United Nations program for AIDS. And she left as an assistant secretary general of the United Nations when she was recruited and joined the Oak Foundation as their president. The Oak Foundation addresses issues of global social and environmental concerns, particularly those that have a major impact on the lives of the disadvantaged. She also provides leadership and guidance to other than 6 substantive programs of the Foundation, including the environment, child abuse, housing and homelessness, international human rights, issues affecting, which is very pertinent today, women and learning differences. She also, during her period and time with the United Nations, created and chaired the steering committee of the Stop Rape Now, a UN action against sexual violence in conflict. She chaired the Leadership Council of the Global Coalition of Women and AIDS, and actually was one of the founding mothers of that organization, a group of prominent personalities who advocate issues publicly on to women and the feminization of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. I could continue, but I guess time was short, and I will now give the floor to Dr. Cravero.
Distinguished members of the panel, distinguished participants. It is a great pleasure to participate in this national workshop on such an important subject, on such an important occasion for India. And I'm very proud that Oak Foundation is possible. The title chosen for this meeting is significant. It indicates that when it comes to violence against women, there are formidable challenges that only comprehensive, united efforts can address. Throughout the day, we will learn about different components of such efforts: the role of tradition, legal initiatives, awareness and education, immigration status, and substance abuse, among other issues. I'm not an expert on India, so I look forward to learning with everyone else. And in these opening remarks, I will not focus on India specifically. Rather, I will suggest a few lessons that we've learned about domestic violence internationally, which, despite very real differences in context, seem to apply across countries. In the concept note for this workshop, Maitree states that domestic violence is a critical issue that includes physical violence, sexual violence, threats of physical and sexual violence, psychological, emotional abuse, and stalking. It takes place in both the public and private sphere. It has strong linkages to social attitudes. It has strong linkages to social attitudes. It takes place in intimate partnerships that are both formal and informal, and it has varying time frames. In other words, it doesn't necessarily start with a marriage, nor does it end with a divorce. Domestic violence, as Winnie has said, affects all social classes, ages, traditions, ethnic groups, and countries. It costs nations millions of dollars a year, both in loss of productivity and in the high cost of response in terms of health and social services. Why then doesn't this problem get the attention it deserves? Why is it considered inevitable? Why is it relegated to private sector as if it was limited to one family or one community? Why are women victims of domestic abuse one of the most invisible groups in the world? I hope that this workshop will help us think through some of these nagging issues for India and beyond. I have been asked to discuss one component in a comprehensive response to domestic violence: the impact of economic power on domestic issues and challenges. So I have decided to articulate 5 key principles that underlie successful efforts to strengthen the economic independence of women who are victims of or at risk of domestic violence. I hope that they will stimulate discussion throughout the day. First, what is economic dependence in this context? I would suggest that economic independence refers to a condition where individual men and women have their own access to a full range of economic opportunities and resources in order to shape their own futures, meet their needs and the needs of their families and dependents. From a woman's perspective, ensuring economic independence would imply recognizing that women are economic players who contribute to the economic activity and benefit from that activity on an equal basis with men. Women would need to be valued and recognized for the contributions they make to their children, home, community, and economy. This is a tall order in a country like India, and there are many examples of projects and initiatives that aim to realize these goals. They differ in target group, scope, geography, and content. But I believe that the most successful of these efforts share very specific characteristics, 5 of which I will highlight this morning. The first is understanding the big picture. In India, as in every country, domestic violence takes place in homes and communities that are embedded in larger social and economic environments. These include laws, the capacity and willingness of local authorities to implement laws, and access to health and education, among other factors. Efforts to improve the economic status of women must take all these into account, as well as a woman's religious background, the traditions of her family and community, her position or lack thereof in these families and communities, her concern for the welfare of her children, and her genuine feelings of affection for and dependence on her abuser. Too often we see that initiatives that are perfectly structured in the abstract fail when they bump up against the reality of women's lives. Domestic violence is anchored in deeply rooted structures of power, ideological norms, and traditions. In these situations, economic power is not and cannot be a silver bullet. But they do open up options and choices, often for the first time. And the fact is that lack of viable options is a defining characteristic of poor, vulnerable, and abused women. The second characteristic of programs is strengthening support to women's networks. One of the most powerful impediments to women stopping or even reporting abuse is their feelings of social exclusion. They are trapped in households from which they literally cannot escape and are bombarded by messages of their worthlessness. One researcher describes young married women as the most isolated, vulnerable group of people on the planet. We know from experience with microfinance and other programs that regular contact with a peer group of other women can make all the difference. Women are more likely to admit abuse within these groups and be moved to do something about it. This is why in India and elsewhere, there has been so much success with social programs run through women's groups. Women build each other's confidence, support each other through crises, and offer concrete evidence that abuse and neglect are systematic and not due to individual inadequacies or unworthiness. We have seen that when loans are channeled through women's groups and when investments are made in strengthening the groups themselves, substantial shifts in decision-making occur. In a study in Nepal, membership in self-help groups substantially increased women's role in household decisions. A study in the Philippines found that among group members, the number of women who became household fund managers rose by 100%. And a multi-country evaluation of self-help groups in Africa demonstrated that women's increased agency ensured their children's access to food, schooling, and medical care. The success of the Grameen Bank and BRAC in Bangladesh, or the countless other projects in Asia and Africa that have strong women's groups at their base, are no accident. 3, strengthening women's human capital by building their skills and capacities. We have learned through hard-won experience that money is not enough. Because women are tied to families and communities that may not recognize their rights or agency, providing funding in the absence of more fundamental empowerment is not effective. There are societies in Africa, for example, when girls are literally not allowed to say no to anything, never mind the direct wishes of their husbands, their fathers, or their mothers-in-law. Women who have spent their entire lives in silence will not naturally speak up just because they have some cash. They will not become effective advocates for themselves or each other just because they are put on village committees. Women need support in articulating their views, understanding their rights, and negotiating the systems in which they live. Leadership, capacity building, and economic independence are connected and mutually reinforcing. In addition, women cannot be economically empowered if they lack the most basic of services, such as housing, transportation, childcare, and education. We also need to think out of the box about what empowerment means. A recent study in several northern Indian states suggests that access to mobile phones significantly reduces women's tolerance for wife-beating and for husbands' control over their lives. Why? Because mobile phones reduce isolation and increase mobility. We know from both Asia and Africa that owning property is a powerful factor in improving almost every aspect of women's lives. Why? Because property provides status, collateral, and literally somewhere to go when a relationship or family setting becomes intolerable. 4, involve men in the process. When women start earning cash and eventually become primary breadwinners, power relations in households are disrupted. Male partners may suffer from a loss of status and feel inadequate or weak as they lose this key position. This is why the immediate impact of economic empowerment may often cause an increase in violence, as male partners try to gain control over women's earnings. Women may even be forced to take loans by their husbands, who then squander the proceeds, leaving women in debt. In some settings today, more girls than boys are finishing school, more young women than men are graduating from university, and more wives than husbands are contributing to family incomes. Yet levels of abuse stay the same. This is because the power relations between intimate partners has been disrupted but not fundamentally changed. The physically stronger partners are frustrated and angry, and their acting out is tolerated by the communities and families in which they live. Addressing this problem requires a careful balance and is one of the areas we know least about. We need an inclusive approach that includes men and helps them seize the benefits of women's increasing incomes without allowing them to control these resources directly. The fifth is committing to long-term support. Economic empowerment of women, or of any vulnerable group, cannot and does not happen overnight. Done well, economic strengthening programs begin by understanding the context, building women's skills and confidence, creating opportunities for women to be together and support each other, and providing essential support services before they even begin to address economic issues. The positive impact of economic programs on domestic violence may also not be immediately clear. As indicated above, levels of domestic violence may begin to increase as men lose control over women, or as women gain the courage and confidence to report abuse. We must expect ups and downs in economic programs and be willing to stay engaged for the time it takes to change family and community relationships that have trapped women for decades. Violence may also not be immediately clear. As indicated above, levels of domestic violence may begin to increase as men lose control over women, or as women gain the courage and confidence to report abuse. We must expect ups and downs in economic programs and be willing to stay engaged for the time it takes to change family and community relationships that have trapped women for decades. We also need to understand that small one-off loans or short-term projects will not lead women out of poverty. If a woman moves from selling 1 bushel to 3 bushels of tomatoes at the local market, her situation will be improved, but not transformed in any significant way. Initial efforts of this kind must be sustained and scaled up in ways that make real and long-term changes in women's lives. Thus, evidence suggests that strengthening the economic independence of women does, in the medium to long term, have significant impacts on reducing domestic violence. But achieving this potential is not for the faint of heart. It requires a comprehensive approach that recognizes the context in which a woman lives, helps her as an individual, puts her in a supportive peer group, builds her confidence and leadership skills, and appropriately involves her partner and extended family, and remains committed for the long haul. I look forward to learning more throughout the day about the ways in which we can apply these lessons to ensure a safer, happier, and richer future for the women of India. Thank you.